The evolution of man. Our argument is that we believe that humans are currently evolving. Chapter 8. What about us? Introduction. Before we can establish that humans are currently evolving, we must establish that humans evolved from something else into the species they are today. It is generally accepted among the scientific community that we are apes descended from other apes, and our closest cousin is the chimpanzee, whose ancestors diverged from our own several million years ago in Africa. This claim is supported by research with fossils and DNA sequences conducted by paleoanthropologists, geneticists, and molecular biologists. Early debate: creationism versus evolution. There has always been a tug of war between religious fundamentalists and evolutionary biologists. Creationists are compelled by their religious beliefs to deny factual evidence of evolution. At its worst, it is the denial of evolution, period. At its best, they accept evolution of all organisms but draw the line at humans. An example of this case is the monkey trial of 1925, where John Scopes was accused of talking about evolution of man when that was not acceptable, while evolution of animals was okay. And humans are supposedly not part of nature. Fossil ancestors. The missing link. According to Linnaean Taxonomic Organization, we are of the order primates. Our superfamily is Hominidae, with the lesser and greater apes. Our family narrows down to Hominidae, with the great apes. Our closest living relative is the chimpanzee, sharing 98.5% of our DNA. The species at which chimps and humans diverged would be the missing link. Problems with the human fossil history. It is not continuous. There is a number of different species with not exact logical chronological order. Most hominin lineages are dead ends that went extinct without leaving descendants, and only one genetic lineage progressed to become humans. So the problem: which lineages are the dead ends and which ones are part of the human lineage? There are a couple examples of progression in human-like species that show movement from ape-like to human-like. Examples would be the placement of the foramen magnum. Another example is the inward angle of the femur, which supports bipedalism. Finally is parabolic teeth, where we see a progression from the square-like jaw to a more curved-like human jaw and the reduction of teeth like the canines and molars. Hominin coexistence. Within the last 3 million years, many species that were very human-like arose, such as Homo habilis, Homo neanderthalensis, Homo erectus, and Homo rudolfensis. They are thought to have been either living on Earth around the same time as humans or were lineages that led to modern humans. Many believe that the lack of descendants happened due to Homo sapiens wiping out all other human-like species. A unique case where this did not exactly happen is through Homo floresiensis. This hobbit species, according to the Smithsonian, is one of the most recent human-like species to die out, at around 50,000 to 18,000 years ago. The possible theories to explain their long-lasting permeation is that they dodged Homo sapiens colonization on the island that they were found on, Flores, Indonesia.
Our genetic heritage. In this section, Coyle talks about how selection differentiates us from other apes. At a glance, a 1% difference doesn't seem like much, but because we're talking about protein sequences, this could amount to substantial effects on the presence and sequence of the genes in our genome. These differences in gene sequence can cause the dramatic separation between us and our primate cousin. So, the sticky question of race. What are races? What is a race exactly? A race, by definition, is a potentially interbreeding group within a species, almost like a subspecies. Some scientists have argued that it is just a social construct and that it shouldn't be a part of any sort of scientific study. But there are still distinct differences among people, and we are all a part of the same species. There are still genetic differences among the different races, and this ensures that we aren't any different from any other organism or species. So what exactly does the difference the existence of different race tells us. They tell us that over time, when our populations were split geographically, we were able to diverge from one another and create variation among humans. This variation led up to the numerous genotypic and phenotypic traits that have developed over time. This entails with sexual selection because we as humans have developed complex cultures. These social constructs made one phenotype more ideal compared to others, which would increase the frequencies of those ideal phenotypes, as long as they were in favor. In the end, the genetic differences between humans are minuscule, and that selection hasn't really produced many differences between races in our species. So what about now? It is pretty clear that selection has been acting on the human population over the years. But where do we stand? Are we still evolving? In some cases, we can actually say that we are de-evolving. However, this isn't the case. But the reason why people would come to this conclusion is because we have developed improvements in our daily lives that have allowed us to go around the selective pressures that affected our ancestors. And it's because of this we are able to keep some of what we would consider the bad genes in our population, and they could potentially thrive as well. In the article, Are Humans Still Evolving by J.T. Stock, he goes on by saying how we as a species are dependent on culture and technology for survival, and that this has replaced biological adaptation. Even though culture and technology are a huge part of our growth as a species, the randomness of selection and variation are still applied, and we would still have to evolve as a species to stay in this constantly changing environment.
Evolution of redux. Is evolution a theory? No, evolution is not a theory, but it is a scientific fact. Why? Because we can see many evidence like fossil records, biogeography, embryology, and vestigial features, and a lot more. So we see new species form both in real time and in fossil records. So it's not just a macroevolutionary change. And we also observe natural selection in action. Evolutionary biology also makes testable predictions, like the missing link between ants and wasps. Also, another interesting fact is that scientists predicted that they would find fossils of marsupials in Antarctica, and they did. And we can predict that if we find an animal species in which males are brightly colored and females are not, that species will have a polygynous mating system. So, despite the numerous possible observations that could prove evolution is untrue, nobody has found a single one yet. So, when we say organisms evolve gradually and natural selection is the main engine of adaptations, we also prove the principle of Darwinism. So, does that mean there's nothing left to understand? No, evolutionary biology is teeming with questions and controversies. There are many questions critics is upon, like how exactly does sexual selection work? Do females select males with good genes? Or like how much of a role does genetic drift play in the evolution? Something is wrong. They're trying to say that something is wrong with the theory of evolution itself, but there's no major claims of evolutionary theory, only about the details of how evolution occurred and relative roles of various evolutionary mechanisms. Nancy Pearcey argues that all the perceived evils of evolution come from two worldviews that are part of science. One is naturalism and the other one is materialism. Naturalism is the view that the only way to understand our universe is through the scientific method. Materialism is the idea that the only reality is the physical matter of the universe, and that everything else, including thoughts, will, and emotions, come from physical laws acting on that matter. The question is, how can you derive a meaning, a purpose, or ethics from evolution? And the answer is you can't. Evolution is simply a theory about the process and patterns of life's diversification, but not a good grand philosophical scheme about the meaning of life. The beast within. A common belief about evolution is that If we recognize that we are only evolved mammals, there will be nothing to prevent us from acting like beasts. But does the modern evolutionary biology even claims that we are genetically hardwired to behave like our supposedly beastly ancestors? And selection would have had many eons to adapt us to such a lifestyle. Evolutionary psychologists call the physical and social environment to which we adapted during this long period of time the EEA. Examples for EEA are use of symbolic language, division of labor between sexes, male dominance, and the improvement in art, fashion, or music, and all these distinguish human from animals. Evolution is neither moral nor immoral. Biggest misconception is that accepting evolution will somehow sunder our society, wreck our morality, impel us to behave like beasts. Humans have evolved over the years. Above all, we are the only species in the planet that figured out how we came to be. These are some examples to say that humans are still evolving. Genes that regulate humans' ability to digest lactose, and the second one is we are losing our wisdom teeth, and we are resisting diseases, and our brains are shrinking. All these examples, in all these examples, we can see evolution in action. It flags up the importance of a very recent aspect of our evolution as a species. Evolution faces additional problems besides not fitting into the standards definition of science. Despite the extensive research in the field, it has to be acknowledged that some 130 years after the theory was proposed, there are still more questions than answers. Religious fundamentalists frequently pin the blame on modern science in general and on evolution or in particular. But there's absolutely no substance to the claim that evolution is responsible for this perceived large scale decline in morality. This decline, by all objective measured, simply does not exist.